The first time I saw Hannah Mercer, she was standing at my gate in the blue light before snow, a child's hand in each of hers, and she did not ask me for a thing. That was the part that undid me, though I didn't know it yet. A man gets used to being asked. The drifters, the broke cowhands, the families run off their claims. They come to a ranch with their hats already in their hands, the words half out of them before they're off the road. This woman just stood there with her chin level, and her boots cracked open at the toe, and waited for me to be the one to speak. I'd ridden out to the gate because my dog sergeant was carrying on, and I'd half a mind to send whoever it was back down the road before the weather turned. I was good at that in those years, sending people off. I'd had 15 winters of practice at wanting nobody, and I'd gotten where I could do it without raising my voice. "You'd be Mr. Brennan," she said, "not a question. There's a notice in Dunmore at the Mercantile, winter help wanted, Cottonwood Bend." "There is," I said. "I can cook for a crew. I can keep a house, mend, doctor stock, pull a calf. My boy here is 9 and he works like a man twice that." The boy stood up straighter when she said it. "The girl is 6 and she's no trouble. We don't eat much." I looked at the 3 of them. The wind was coming down off the rim with snow already in it, that dry hiss it makes before the flakes come, and the woman had a shawl wrapped twice around her shoulders that wouldn't have warmed a cat. The little girl's lips had gone the color of a bruise. The boy was holding a flour sack with everything they owned in it. I'd find out later, and trying not to shake. "I posted for a man," I said. "I read the notice," she said. "It says winter help. I'm here through winter and I'll do the work of any 2 men you've got, and you can pay me half what you'd pay one." She let that sit a second. "I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Brennan. I'm offering you a bargain you'd be a fool to ride past. Now I want you to understand the kind of man I was then, so you'll know what a near thing it was. My wife Ellen had been 3 years in the ground up on the knoll behind the house, and our boy with her. He'd come too early and lived a day and a night, and we buried them in the same week, that terrible week, and I had not been warm since. I'd let the south half of the house go cold. Shut the doors on those rooms and let the fires die in them, and lived in the kitchen and the one back bedroom like a man living in the corner of his own grave. I ran cattle, and I ran them well, and I spoke to my hands when I had to and to nobody else when I didn't. The town of Dunmore had decided I was a hard man, and I had let them, because it was easier than the truth, which was that I was a frightened one. So when I opened my mouth to tell that woman to go on back down the road, what came out instead surprised me as much as it did her. "There's a fire in the kitchen," I said. "Get those children in front of it before they freeze. We'll talk terms where it's warm." Her name was Hannah Mercer, and her husband John had been dead since the spring. The fever took him in 4 days, she told me, sitting at my kitchen table with her hands around a tin cup of coffee, and the children asleep on the bench by the stove under my spare blanket, the boy's arm thrown over his sister even in his sleep. They'd had a quarter section out on the flats below Dunmore, a hard, dry, stony piece that John had broken his back on for 6 years trying to make it pay. "It would have paid," she said. "Another 2 years and the orchard would have come in and we'd have turned the corner. John had it all figured." She turned the cup in her hands. "It would have paid." "What happened to it?" She was quiet a moment, deciding how much to tell a stranger. The boy stirred and settled. "There's a man named Calhoun," she said. I set my coffee down. "Royce Calhoun." "You know him?" "Everybody in the valley knows him." Royce Calhoun owned the Diamond Sea, the biggest outfit in 3 counties, and he had spent the last few years swallowing the small places one at a time, the way a snake swallows eggs, slow and whole, and without any change in his face. He'd buy a man out cheap if the man could be frightened cheap, and if a man couldn't be frightened, he'd find the man's water suddenly fouled, or his fences suddenly down, or his bank note suddenly called by a banker who happened to owe Calhoun a favor. He had the look of a deacon and the soul of a land grabber, and he had never once, in any of it, done a thing the law could put a hand on. "After John died," Hannah said, "the bank called our note. We were never but a season behind. Everyone out on the flats is a season behind. That's just how it is, but they called it all at once. And the same week, a man from the Diamond Sea came and made me an offer for the place. A low offer. Insulting low. He said it real friendly. Said a widow with 2 little ones had no business breaking sod alone, and Mr. Calhoun was prepared to be generous on account of my situation. Her jaw tight. I told him my situation was none of Mr. Calhoun's affair, and he could carry that back to him with my compliments. And then your fences came down, I said quietly. She looked at me sharp. And then my well went bad, something dead down in it. And then I couldn't make the note because you can't water stock or a garden from a fouled well, and the bank took the place, and the bank sold the place, and you can guess to who. She drank her coffee. Sheriff Pratt said there was nothing he could do, said it was all legal, and it was. That's the devil of it, Mr. Brennan. It was all of it legal. The little girl made a small sound in her sleep, and Hannah was up and across the kitchen before I'd half turned my head, her hand smoothing the child's hair, murmuring something low. She came back and sat down and picked her coffee up again as though she'd never left it. So that's my situation, she said. We've been 3 weeks living in a line shack a friend let us use, but he's got the Diamond Sea breathing on him too, and he can't keep us. It isn't safe for him. I've got $4 and a wedding ring I won't sell, and 2 children who are going to be hungry come January if I don't find work before the pass is close. She set the cup down and met my eyes square. I'm a good worker and a clean cook, and I don't drink or steal or lie. I'd be grateful for the place, but I'll not beg you for it, and I'll not have you take us in out of pity. If you've no use for us, say so, and we'll be gone in the morning. I sat there in my cold house with this woman's whole hard life laid out plain on my kitchen table, and I thought about Ellen, who'd had that same straight back, that same way of looking trouble in the eye and nomming it. I thought about how long it had been since anyone had sat at that table at all. I've got use for you, I said. 60 acres of hay still down in the lower field that I'm short-handed to get in before it spoils under the snow. A house gone to rack because I quit caring whether it stood up, and a winter coming that's going to be a bad one, you can smell it. I stood and took the coffee pot off the stove and filled her cup without asking. You'll have the south rooms. They're cold but they're sound, and we'll put fires in them. You'll cook for me and the 2 hands I keep on through winter. Your boy can earn his keep at the barn. I'll pay him a wage, a real one, not a child's. The girl helps you. I'll pay you $1 a day and your keep, and I'll not hear another word about taking less, because $1 a day is what the work is worth, and I don't haggle over what a thing's worth. She looked at me for a long moment. I have seen a lot of faces in my life, but I have never seen one work so hard to keep from crying and win. That's more than fair, she managed. It's fair, I said. There's no such thing as more than fair. Now drink your coffee. I'll go open up those rooms. It took me the better part of an hour to get fires going in the south of the house. Those rooms I'd kept shut 3 years. I had to wade through the dust and the dark with a lamp, and the first room I came to was the one that had been meant for the baby, and I stood in the doorway of it a long time before I could make myself go in. There was a cradle in there still, that I had made with my own hands the winter Ellen was carrying, and I'd never been able to burn it nor look at it, so I just shut the door on it. I carried it out to the barn that night in the snow so the children wouldn't have to wonder at it, and I'm not ashamed to tell you I sat down on a bale afterward and put my face in my hands for a while in the dark, and Sergeant came and leaned his weight against my leg the way a good dog will. Then I got up and went back in and built the fires and made up the beds with the linens that smelled of 3 years in a chest, and when I had it warm and decent I went and told Hannah the rooms were ready, and she carried her sleeping girl, and I carried her sleeping boy. He was heavier than he looked, all bone and grit, and we put them in clean, warm beds in a house that had 2 fires going in it that hadn't had one for longer than I cared to count. Standing in the hall after, with the lamp between us, Hannah said, "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." "Holt," I said. "If you're going to be cooking my breakfast, you'd best call me Holt." "Holt," she said, trying it. "Thank you, Holt. And then, because she was who she was, I'll have your breakfast on at 5. She had it on at 5. I won't pretend that morning I came into the kitchen and the smell of it and the warmth of it and the sound of a child's voice in my house didn't hit me like a horse kicking. It did. I stood in the doorway about as struck as a man can be. The boy, his name was Tobe, was already up and dressed and bolting eggs like he hadn't eaten in a week, which he likely near hadn't, and the little girl, Bertie, was solemnly buttering bread with the deep concentration of the very young, and Hannah was at the stove with her sleeves rolled and her hair pinned up, and it was the most ordinary scene in the world, and it about took the legs out from under me. "Sit down, Mr. Holt," Hannah said, not looking around, "before it's cold." I sat down. I ate the best breakfast I'd had in 3 years, and then I took the boy down to the barn to teach him the morning chores, and I found out fast that Hannah hadn't been bragging. That child worked. He listened, he asked a question once and then he had it, and he wasn't afraid of the cold nor the stock nor the early dark. And by the end of that first week the 2 old hands I kept on, Pegleg Sorensen and a Mexican vaquero named Cruz who'd been with me 8 years and was the best stockman I ever knew, had taken to Tobe like he was their own. Cruz started teaching him to throw a loop in the lulls. Pegleg, who hadn't said 40 words to me in a year, took to telling the boy stories so tall you'd need a ladder. I'd be a liar if I said the house thawed all at once. I didn't. I'd lived behind that stone wall too long to come out from behind it just because somebody had lit a fire on the other side. There were mornings I was short with all of them out of pure habit, and Hannah would just look at me, not hurt, not afraid, just looking, the way you'd look at weather and go on about her work, and I'd feel like a fool the rest of the day. She had a way of not taking my hardness personal that took all the use out of it. But the children were another matter. You cannot stay frozen around children. They won't allow it. They don't know you're supposed to be a hard man. Nobody's told them. It was Bertie that got to me first. She was a quiet little thing, watchful, and she had a habit of following me around the place at a distance of about 10 feet, not saying anything, just watching the way the half-wild barn cats did. I'd be mending tack and I'd look up and there she'd be, sitting on a bale with her hands in her lap, watching. I never made her go away. I don't know why. One cold afternoon I was working a stubborn knot out of a length of rope and I felt her there, and without thinking much about it I held out the end of it and said, "Here, you hold this taut while I work it." She came and held it, took it dead serious, both hands, leaned back against the weight of it with her whole little body, and when I'd got the knot out I said, "Good. Couldn't have done it without you," which was a lie, and she looked up at me with a look I have not forgotten and will not, a look like a window opening, and she said, "Can I help tomorrow too?" "You can help any day you've a mind to," I heard myself say. After that she was my shadow. She named all the horses, gave them names that had no sense to them. She called my big sorrel gelding Pancake, and the name stuck, and I am sorry to say I call that horse Pancake to this very day. She rode in front of me on the saddle when I went out to check fence, bundled up to the eyes, narrating the whole country to me as though I'd never seen it. "That's a hawk. That's a dead tree. That's snow coming, Mr. Holt. You can smell it." She could, too. She had her mother's nose for weather. And Tobe and I built something between us out in that barn, and those frozen fields that I have never had words for. He was hungry for a man to learn from, the way a fatherless boy is, and I had a whole life's worth of frontier learning dammed up in me with nobody to give it to, and the 2 needs met and made something. I taught him to read sign, and to set a fence post that would stand, and to gentle a colt with patience instead of a quirt. He taught me, though he never knew it, how to talk again. How to be in a room with another person and not be braced against them. I'd catch myself those weeks being something close to happy, and it would scare me so bad I'd go cold for a day. I knew what happened when you let yourself love a thing on the frontier. I had a knoll behind my house to remind me. But you cannot hold the cold against children, no matter how good a reason you've got, and slowly, against all my better judgment and all my hard-won wisdom about the danger of caring, that house came back to life around me, and I let it, The way a man lets the spring come whether he's ready for it or not. It was about the third week that I came to understand Hannah wasn't just a good worker and a fine mother. She was the best ranch hand I'd ever had, and that includes Cruz, and Cruz could ride down a calf in the dark. It happened in the first real storm. A heifer got herself caught in the wire and down in a drift out in the lower pasture in the worst of it, and it was Hannah, going out to throw scraps to the hogs, who heard her bawling on the wind when none of us had. She didn't come running to fetch a man. She grabbed the wire cutters off the barn wall and a lantern and went out into that storm herself. And by the time Cruz and I figured out where she'd got to and floundered out after her, she had the heifer cut free and was packing snow against a gash on the animal's leg to slow the bleeding, her own hands blue, her hair full of ice, cool as you please. "She'll need stitching," Hannah said when we got there, like she'd been expecting us. "And she's chilled near to dying. We've got to get her up and walking or we'll lose her." We got that heifer up and walking, the three of us in the worst storm of the winter, and Hannah was the one calling it, and she was right at every turn when to push the animal and when to let her rest, how to rig a sling of rope in our own bodies to keep her from going down again. We saved that heifer. Back in the warm barn after, Hannah stitched the gash herself with a needle and wax thread, neat as a seamstress, while I held the lantern, and Cruz watched her work and then looked at me and raised one eyebrow about a quarter inch, which from Cruz was the same as another man hollering it from the rooftop. He'd seen it too. This was no ordinary woman. "Where'd you learn to stitch stock?" I asked her. "Same place I learned everything," she said, biting off the thread. "Necessity. John was laid up half of one summer with a broke leg, and the work didn't stop just because he couldn't do it." She straightened and pressed a hand to the small of her back. "A thing needs doing, you find out you can do it. Turns out you can do near anything if the alternative's watching it all fall down." I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count in the years since. You can do near anything if the alternative's watching it all fall down. That was Hannah Mercer, root and branch. That was the whole of her. After that, I quit thinking of her as winter help and started thinking of her as my partner in the running of the place. And I started telling her so, asking her judgment on things, and she'd give it plain, and it was nearly always better than mine. We'd sit at the kitchen table after the children were down and go over the place, the stock, the hay, the spring branding to come, the money. She had a head for figures that left me in the dust. She found 2 mistakes in my accounts, the first time she looked at them, that had been costing me money for years. And we'd talk. Lord, we talked. I hadn't talked to a soul, not really, since Ellen, and it came out of me slow at first and then in a flood, the way water comes out of a long-shut pipe, rusty, then sudden, then clear. I told her about Ellen. I'd never told anybody about Ellen. I told her about the baby and the cradle in the barn and the rooms I'd shut up and the 3 years I'd spent being a stone so I wouldn't have to be a man with a hole in his chest. She didn't say any of the things people say. She didn't tell me it was God's will or that they were in a better place or that time heals. She just listened with her whole self, the way she did everything, and when I was done she said, she'd be glad the rooms are warm again. That was all. She'd be glad the rooms are warm again. And something in me that had been clenched for 3 years let go all at once, and I had to get up and go stand at the window a while, and Hannah let me, and didn't say anything, and when I came back and sat down she'd refilled my coffee. I won't tell you I fell in love with her that night, because that wouldn't be honest. It was slower than that and better than that. I fell in love with her the way the ground thaws, not in a moment, but in 10,000 moments, an inch of frost giving up a day, until one morning you walk out and the whole world's gone soft and green and you can't say when it happened, only that it has, and that there's no going back to the freeze. But I am getting ahead of the trouble, and there was trouble coming, the kind that doesn't knock. It came first as talk in town. I'd ride into Dunmore for supplies and feel the temperature of the place, and that winter the temperature was fear. Royce Calhoun had stopped buying out the small homesteaders cheap and started just taking. The Aldous family, up on the north end, had their winter hay burn in the stack in the middle of the night, a thing hay does not do on its own in December, and the next week a Diamond C man came around real friendly with an offer. The Petersons' boy got beaten half to death by men he couldn't name on the road home from a dance. Widow Tate's cattle started dying of something that wasn't any sickness anybody'd seen, and then a Diamond C man came around, friendly, with an offer. And nobody could do a thing. Sheriff Pratt was Calhoun's man, not bought exactly, just bent, just a small frightened man who decided a long time ago which way the wind blew and had no intention of standing against it. The county judge held court in Calhoun's parlor as often as in the courthouse. The bank was Calhoun's. The newspaper was Calhoun's cousin's. A man being squeezed in Quill Valley had nowhere to take it, and that was by design, Calhoun's design, patient and total. He didn't want to fight the valley. He wanted to own it without ever having to. I'd kept clear of it. I'm ashamed of that now, but I'll tell it true. The Diamond C had never come at me, because I was big enough and hard enough and well-armed enough to be more trouble than I was worth, and a man like Calhoun does his arithmetic. So I told myself it wasn't my fight. I'd watched my neighbors get ground down one at a time, and I'd told myself a man's got to look to his own, and I'd ridden home to my cold house and shut the door. But it wasn't a cold house anymore. That was the thing Hannah and those children did to me that I hadn't reckoned on. They didn't just warm the rooms. They thawed out the part of me that could be ashamed of myself. A frozen man feels nothing, and that's the mercy of it and the curse. A thawed man feels everything, including the weight of all the doors he's shut. It came to a head in February. I was in the Mercantile in Dunmore when a Diamond C foreman named Dab Sully came in, a big, smiling, mean man, Calhoun's chief persuader, and he came in with two others, and he saw me, and his smile got wider. "Brennan," he said, "heard you took on some help for the winter." I didn't say anything. I'd learned that from Hannah. You don't have to fill every silence. "A widow," Sully said, real pleasant, picking up a tin of peaches and turning it over. "2 kids, Mercer was it, the Mercer widow." He set the peaches down. Mr. Calhoun was real interested to hear that. On account of Mrs. Mercer left some matters unsettled when she vacated her property, some debts. Mr. Calhoun likes things settled. "Mrs. Mercer's debts were paid when Calhoun stole her place," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "There's nothing unsettled." Sully's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. That's not how Mr. Calhoun recollects it. He'd take it kindly if you'd send the woman around to his office to discuss it. Real kindly. He let that sit. Be a shame for a peaceable outfit like yours to find itself in the middle of somebody else's troubles, Brennan. You've got a good thing out there on the bend. Quiet. Be ashamed to see it get noisy. There it was, the friendly offer, the one that wasn't an offer at all. I have replayed what I did next many times, and I am not entirely proud of the temper of it, but I am not sorry for the substance. I crossed that store and I took Dab Sully by the front of his coat, and I walked him back into a stack of feed sacks hard enough to knock the wind half out of him, and I put my face close to his and I said, low, so only he could hear it. "You listen to me. That woman and those children are under my roof and my protection. You go back and tell Royce Calhoun that the Mercer family's business is closed, and that the Brennan place is closed to him and his, and that the next Diamond C man who sets foot on Cottonwood Bend or so much as speaks Mrs. Mercer's name on the street is going to learn what kind of trouble a quiet man can make when he's finally got something worth being loud about. You understand me, Sully? You tell him those exact words." I let him go. He straightened his coat. The smile was gone now, and what was under it was worse, but I'd known that was coming. "You just made a mistake, Brennan," he said. "I've made a lot of them," I said. "This one I'll stand behind." I rode home with my blood up and my judgment, I'll admit, not at its best, and I came into the kitchen still hot, and Hannah took one look at me and sent the children out to the barn to help Cruz. And then she stood with her back to the stove and her arms crossed and said, "What happened?" I told her, all of it, and I watched her face go pale, not with fear for herself. I'd come to know what Hannah's fear looked like, and it was never for herself, but with fear for me and for Tobe and Bertie and for the place. "Holt," she said when I'd finished, and her voice was very quiet, "you shouldn't have done that. He threatened you. He stood there and threatened you and the children and my place." "I know what he did." She came across the kitchen. "And I know what you did and why, and I'll not pretend it doesn't." She stopped and started again. "But Holt, you've just put yourself in the same crosshairs that took my John's place. That's taken half the valley. These people don't fight fair, and they don't fight loud, and they don't lose. They'll come at you sideways. Your hay, your water, your stock, your hands. They'll find the loose thread and they'll pull it." Her eyes were bright. "I brought this to your door. I should never have. We should go. We should leave before." "No," I said. "Holt." "No." I took her by the shoulders. It was the first time I'd touched her, I realized, in all those weeks, and we both felt it, and neither of us moved. "Hannah, listen to me. You did not bring this to my door. Calhoun's been at this valley for years, and I sat in my cold house and let him because I decided I didn't care about anything anymore, and that was a coward's peace, and I knew it even while I was keeping it." I held her there. "You and those children walked into this house, and you reminded me I'm a man with a man's obligations, and one of them is to not stand by while my neighbors get ground down. So no, you're not leaving. We're not running. We're going to stand, and we're going to do it smart, and we're not going to do it alone." "Alone is all there is," she said, but I could hear that she wanted to be wrong. "It doesn't have to be," I said. And right then, holding that woman in my warm kitchen with the snow coming down outside, I had the first clear thought I'd had about Royce Calhoun in years. He's beaten the valley by keeping it scattered, one family at a time. That's the whole of his game. Make sure nobody stands together, because as long as it's one frightened family against the Diamond Sea wins every time. But it was never one family against him. It was the whole valley against one greedy man, and the valley just never knew it could add itself up. Hannah was looking at me now in a way she hadn't before. "You want to add up the valley," she said slowly. "I want to add up the valley." She was quiet a moment. Then something I'd not seen on her face before came into it. Not hope exactly. Hope was too soft a word for it. It was the look of someone who'd been doing fearful arithmetic for a long time in the dark and had just been handed a lamp. "It would have to be done careful," she said. "Quiet at first. He's got ears everywhere. Pratt the bank, half the men in any saloon." "Then we don't do it in saloons. And it can't be just talk. Talk's cheap, and these are people who have been burned for talking. You'd have to give them something solid. A reason to believe standing together would work where standing alone got their barns burned." She'd started to pace now, the way she did when her mind was running. "Evidence. We'd need evidence, real evidence of what Calhoun's done. The fires, the fouled wells, the dead stock, the beatings. Pulled together, all of it, so it can't be waved off as one widow's bad luck or one man's spite. A pattern. You put all of it in one place in front of the right man, and suddenly it's not legal anymore. It's a conspiracy, and conspiracy reaches even a Royce Calhoun." I stared at her. "The right man being who?" "Pratt's bought. The judge holds court in Calhoun's parlor." "Not the county," she said. "Above the county. There's a federal marshal works out of the territorial seat. John knew a man who dealt with him, said he was the one law in this whole territory Calhoun couldn't reach because Calhoun's never gotten his hooks into the territory, only the county. A federal man with a pattern of crimes laid out plain in front of him and a dozen families willing to swear to it." She stopped packing and looked at me. "That's how you beat him, Holt. Not with guns. He's got more guns than we'll ever have, and the minute it's a shooting matter he wins, because he's got Pratt to call it self-defense and the paper to call us the outlaws. You beat him by making it bigger than the valley, by making it the law's problem, the real law, the law he can't reach." I want to tell you I'd thought of all that. I hadn't. I'd been about 3 steps into the idea, and Hannah Mercer had run the whole thing to ground while I was still finding my hat. That was the moment, if you want to know, not a sunset, not a dance, not a stolen kiss. That was the moment I knew I loved her past all sense and all caution, watching her figure out how to save a valley at my kitchen table with snow on the window. A man could spend a whole life and never meet a mind like that. I'd been lucky enough to have it walk up to my gate in cracked boots and ask me for work. "All right," I said, "then that's what we'll do, your plan." "Our plan," she said. "Our plan," I agreed, and it was the truest word I'd said in years that hour. It took us the rest of that winter and into the spring, and it was Hannah's mind that drove every piece of it. We started quiet, just like she'd said. I'd ride out to a neighbor's place under cover of some ordinary errand to buy a bull, to return a borrowed harrow, and I'd sit at their table and I wouldn't say a word about Calhoun until they trusted I wasn't there fishing for him. And then I'd tell them plain. I'd been hit too, near enough. The Brennan place had been threatened, and I was tired of watching the valley get eaten one bite at a time. And every one of them, every single one, had the same first reaction, which was fear. The deep bone fear of people who'd learned the hard way what happened to anyone who stood up. And every one of them had the same second reaction after the fear, when they understood I wasn't asking them to stand alone, which was a kind of disbelief. And then slow, like a coal catching, a thing I can only call hope. Hannah ran the gathering of the evidence like a general. She made me a map of the valley, and we marked every wrong we could confirm, every fire, every fouled well, every beating, every cheap forced sale, every called note, the date of each one, and the Diamond C offer that followed it. When you laid it all out on one sheet, the pattern was so plain it took your breath. It was a campaign. It had been a campaign for 6 years, and because it had happened to people one at a time, scattered across 100 square miles and 100 lonely months, nobody had ever seen the shape of the whole thing. Hannah saw it. Hannah made the rest of us see it. She thought of things I'd never have thought of. She had the Peterson's boy describe the men who beat him, and one of them had a Diamond C horse, branded, that the boy had seen tied at the rail, a small thing, but it was a thread that tied a beating to the brand. She found the man who dug the dead dog out of the Mercer's own well, her own well, the crime that had started all this for her, and got him to admit with a great deal of shame that a Diamond C man had paid him $2 to do it. $2. She wrote it all down, all of it, in a clean, steady hand, statement after statement, and got each one signed or marked and witnessed. And she kept the whole growing pile of it in a flour tin under a loose board in the south bedroom, the room that had been meant for my son. And I never told her what that room had been, but I think she knew. And I think it pleased some deep part of me that the thing that was going to save the valley lived in that room. There were close calls. A Diamond C rider came onto the bend one night and tried to fire my hay, and only Sergeants Barking and Tobe, 9 years old, who heard it first and ran for me in his nightshirt without a thought for himself, kept it from going up. We put the fire out, the 4 of us in the hands, a bucket line in the dark, and afterward I held that boy by the shoulders and told him he'd done a man's work and saved us, and not to ever do anything so brave and foolish again. And he looked at me with his father's face. I'd seen the tintype by then. He had John Mercer's face, and said, "But it's our place, Mr. Holt. You don't run from your own place." And I had to turn away from him too that night. There was a lot of turning away that winter, a lot of a hard man finding his face was wet. The closest call was Hannah herself. Calhoun figured out, the way a man like that does, that the trouble brewing in his valley had a center, and that the center was the Brennan place, and he came to understand that the Mercer widow he dismissed as a problem solved was the mind behind it. And so Dab Sully made the mistake, the last mistake the Diamond C made in Quill Valley, of catching Hannah alone on the road into Dunmore one April morning and trying to frighten her. I wasn't there. Cruz was 100 yards back with a wagon, and Cruz told me after. Sully rode up alongside Hannah's buggy and laid hold of her horse's bridle and stopped her in the road, and leaned down, all teeth, and said some things to her about what happened to women who didn't mind their own affairs, and what could happen to children. And Cruz had his rifle half up and was kicking the team into a run to get to her. And he said Hannah Mercer, alone on that road with a mean man's hand on her horse, never so much as flinched. She looked Dab Sully dead in the eye, Cruz said, and she said, real quiet, "Mr. Sully, every word you've just said to me has been written down before this day in statements signed by 20 families and locked where you'll never find them. And every word you say from here forward is one more rope around your employer's neck and your own. Now take your hand off my horse." And Cruz said Sully looked at her and looked back at Cruz coming on with the rifle and did the arithmetic, the way those men always did the arithmetic, and took his hand off her horse and rode away. She'd faced him down with nothing but the truth and the nerve to say it. She told me about it that night like it was no more than a hard patch of road. I aged 10 years hearing it and fell deeper in love at the same time, which I have since learned is just what loving somebody is. We took it to the territory in May, when the passes opened. I won't drag you through all of it, the long ride to the territorial seat, the days of waiting, the federal marshal who turned out to be a spare, gray, unimpressed sort of man named Halloran who'd seen every kind of trouble and believed in none of it until you proved it. We proved it. Hannah and I laid that flour tin's worth of evidence out on his desk, the map, the dates, the sign statements, the dog in the well and the burned hay and the beaten boy and the dead stock and the 6 years of forced cheap sales, the whole patient murderous shape of it. And we watched that gray unimpressed man get less gray and less unimpressed page by page, until at the end he sat back and looked at the two of us a long while and said, "You understand that what you've brought me here is not bad luck. This is a criminal enterprise. This is a man who has run a county like a private kingdom because he made sure his subjects never compared notes." He tapped the stack. "You got them to compare notes." "My wife did," I said. I hadn't meant to say it. It just came out, my wife, and Hannah's head came up and I looked at her and I didn't take it back. "Mrs. Mercer did. It was her doing, all of it. I just rode where she pointed." Halloran almost smiled. "Then Mrs. Mercer," he said, "ought to be a lawyer, and the territory's lucky she isn't, or none of the rest of us would ever win a case." He stood and put out his hand to her first before me. "You'll have your federal court, ma'am, and you'll have me to bring him to it." It wasn't quick, the law never is, but it was sure. Halloran came into the valley with 2 deputies and a federal warrant and a stack of charges as long as your arm. And the thing about a man like Royce Calhoun is that his whole power was the appearance that he couldn't be touched, and the second he was touched, the second the federal marshal walked into the Diamond Sea and put him under arrest in front of his own men, the appearance shattered like ice, and everything under it came apart fast. Dab Sully, looking at a rope, decided he'd rather talk than swing, and he talked for 2 days straight. Sheriff Pratt, that small, frightened, bent man, found a little late spine and turned territory's witness in exchange for keeping out of a cell himself, and gave up everything he'd looked away from for 10 years. The bank's books were opened. The Cousins newspaper turned on Calhoun overnight, the way such papers do. By the time it was over, Royce Calhoun was bound for a federal prison, and his great kingdom was being broken up, and the law was working, slow and grinding and sure, to give the small folk back what could be given back. They gave Hannah back the Mercer place. The court unwound the forced sale and the Fouldwell fraud and put the quarter section on the flats back in her name, free and clear, with the bank's wrongful note voided. She owned her land again, John's land, the orchard he'd planted just starting to come into its first real bearing, the place he'd broken his back to make pay finally about to pay. And that, you'd think, is where the story ends. The widow gets her land back, the villain goes to prison, the valley is free. A fine ending, except it isn't the ending, because the day the court papers came through giving Hannah back her place, I understood that it meant she could leave. She had her land, her independence, her children's future, everything she'd come to my gate without. She didn't need the Brennan place anymore. She didn't need me. The bargain was over. I am not a man who finds words easy, as you've gathered, and the night I had to find them was the hardest of my life, harder than the night I lost Ellen, because that night the choice had been taken from me, and this night the choice was mine to make and mine to ruin. The children were down. Hannah and I were at the kitchen table where we'd spent so many nights, the lamp between us, and there was a thing in the air that hadn't been there before, the thing that comes when something's ending. She had the court papers in front of her, her land, her freedom. She kept smoothing them with her hand. "You'll want to be getting back to your own place," I said. It came out wrong, stiff, the cold man's voice I'd thought I was done with. "Before the orchard wants tending. I can send Cruz and Tobe over to help you set it right. The house'll need work after a year empty." She didn't look up from the papers. "Is that what you want?" she said. "For me to be getting back to my own place?" "It's your land," I said. "John's land. It's right that you have it. It's right that you go home to it." You didn't answer me. Now she did look up, and her eyes were doing that thing, that working hard not to end winning thing, except this time I wasn't sure she was going to win. "I asked what you want, Holt Brennan. You're the one always saying you don't haggle over what a thing's worth. So don't haggle, say it plain. What do you want?" And I looked at that woman across my kitchen table, the woman who'd walked up to my gate in cracked boots and lit a fire in a house that had been cold 3 years, who'd thawed me and partnered me and outthought a tyrant and given me back my own self. The woman whose children had taught me how to laugh and how to weep and how to be a father to somebody who needed one. And I thought about Ellen up on the knoll. And I knew, the way you sometimes just know a thing, that Ellen would have liked her. That Ellen would have said the same thing Hannah had said about the rooms. "Be glad they're warm again. Don't shut the door on this one too. You've shut enough doors." So I said it plain. "I want you to stay." My voice cracked on it and I let it. "Not as help, not for a wage. I quit being able to think of you as help a long time ago and you know it. I want you to stay because this house was dead before you came to it and you brought it back to life, and I was dead before you came to it and you brought me back too, and I had to stop. I made myself go on. I don't want to live in a warm house again and have you not be in it. I want to marry you, Hannah. I want Tobe and Bertie to be mine, my own, to give my name to if they'll have it. I want your land and my land to be our land and our children's after us. I've got nothing to offer you that you can't get for yourself. You've proved that 10 times over. You don't need me. You never needed me. You're the strongest soul I ever met. But I'm asking you anyway. I'm asking you to choose to stay, free and clear, your own woman with your own land because you want to, and not because you've got nowhere else to go. That's the only way I'd want you, freely, choosing it." She was quiet for what felt like a year. Then she got up, and she came around the table, and she took my rough hand in both of hers, those capable hands that had cut a heifer out of the wire and stitched the gash and written down the truth statement by statement until it brought down a king, and she held it against her face for a moment, and she said, "I had nowhere else to go the night I came to this gate. That's true, but I'm not that woman tonight, Holt. Tonight I've got my own land and my own money and my own name, and I could walk out that door and make my way and never want for anything." She pressed my hand. "And I'm telling you I don't want to walk out that door. I want to walk in. I've wanted to walk in since about the 2nd week, since I watched a hard man hold a rope taut for a little girl and tell her he couldn't have done it without her and lie about it. I chose you a long time ago, Holt Brennan. I'm just glad you finally got around to giving me the chance to say so out loud." And she smiled, that rare full smile of hers that she spent like it was money. "Yes, I'll stay. I'll marry you freely, choosing it. Now stop talking." I stood up and I took that woman in my arms, and I'll let the rest of it fade where the decent things fade. But I will tell you that we stood there a long while in the warm kitchen, and that I felt the last of the cold go out of me, the very last of it, the deep cold I'd carried 3 winters, and it never came back. Not in all the years since. Hannah Mercer thought it for good. We were married that summer, out under the cottonwoods on the bend, with the whole valley there, the valley that had learned that hard year that it could stand up if it stood up together, and that had Hannah to thank for the lesson. The Petersons came, and the boy, healed and grown a hand taller. The Aldous family, Widow Tate. Pegleg cried like a baby and pretended it was dust. Cruz stood up beside me as my man in a clean shirt, the proudest I ever saw him. Marshall Halloran came, all the way from the territory, and danced with the bride, and told me quiet that I was a luckier man than I had any right to be, and I told him I knew it better than he did. Tobe gave his mother away, walking her across the grass serious as a judge, 9 years old in a new coat. And then he came and stood by me, because we'd talked it over, and the boy had asked could he stand on both sides, and I'd said a boy who saved a ranch from burning could stand wherever in this world he pleased. And Birdie carried the ring on a pillow and got distracted halfway by Pancake the horse looking over the fence and went to feed him a flower, and the whole valley laughed, and it was the best sound I ever heard, that laughing, in that place that had been so silent so long. We made the two places into one outfit, hers and mine, and worked them together, and they paid. John's orchard came in heavy that fall, basket after basket. The corner he died one season short of turning, and Hannah and I turned it together, and I think of John Mercer every harvest still and tip my hat to him, the man who broke that ground, the man whose children I got the gift of raising. I never felt I'd taken his place. There's no taking a man's place. I just got to fill a chair he'd left empty and try to be worth the filling. The children took my name. Toe Brennan grew up to be the finest stockman in Quill Valley, Cruz's pupil and mine. And he runs the home place now with a good wife and children of his own who call me grandfather, which is a word I never thought to hear and can't hear, yet without something happening in my chest. Birdie, she's grown now too, married to a doctor over in the territorial seat, of all things, and she names her own children's horses ridiculous names and they stick. And last spring she sat with me on the porch and told me she still got that first knot of rope I let her hold, kept it all these years in a box, and I had to get up and go see to something in the barn. Hannah and I had two more between us, in the rooms I'd once kept cold, a girl and then a boy born healthy and loud in the room I'd built the cradle for, and I made a new cradle with these same hands, and that one I never had to carry to the barn. We had 31 years together. I lost her 2 winters past, and I'll not pretend that's anything but the hardest thing, the very hardest, harder even than the first time, because we'd had so much longer to grow into each other. But here is what I know now that I didn't know the night she came to my gate, the night I almost sent her down the road. A man can be so afraid of the cold of losing that he never lets himself have the warmth of having, and that is the worst bargain there is, the coward's bargain. And I'd made it for 3 years before she came and unmade it for me. I think of her every day. I think of her standing at my gate in the blue light before snow, a child's hand in each of hers, her chin level, asking me for nothing, offering me everything. I almost rode past it. I came that close to keeping my cold house and my cold heart and dying a hard man alone behind a stone wall, and I'd never have known what I'd missed, which is the only mercy in it. But I didn't ride past. Some part of me that wasn't all the way frozen yet opened my mouth and said, get those children in front of the fire. And every warm thing in my long life came in through that door behind them. The whole of it. Everything worth having. So if you're a hard man reading this, and I was as hard as they come, and you've shut some doors against the cold, I'll tell you the one thing I learned worth telling. Go open them. Whatever you've lost, whatever you're afraid to lose again. Go light the fires in the rooms you've let go dark. You don't know who's standing at your gate in the blue light, asking you for nothing with everything in her 2 hands. Don't you dare ride past her. I almost did. It's the closest call I ever had, and I've had a few.